The scalding coffee splashed across her metals, but what hurt more were the whispered words, "Your kind belongs in coach." Captain Maya Johnson didn't flinch, not visibly. Years of combat had trained her to control her body, but nothing in Afghanistan prepared her for this. She was 34 years old, wearing her full army dress uniform, with every fold crisp, every button, gleaming, her two purple hearts pinned just beneath the Distinguished Service Cross ribbon. She had boarded Delta Flight 2437 from Atlanta to Washington, D.C., not as a regular passenger, but as a soldier handpicked to receive a personal commendation from the president the next morning. It was supposed to be the proudest flight of her life. Instead, it began with humiliation. Scene 1, entering first class. Maya had felt the air shift the moment she stepped into the first-class cabin. The hum of conversation dulled, heads turned, eyes scanned. Disbelief, annoyance, and thinly veiled judgment flickered across the faces of the mostly white, well-dressed passengers. A businessman in his 50s sighed dramatically as she moved down the aisle. Another woman leaned toward her companion, whispering something behind a manicured hand. And then there was the flight attendant, Barbara Reynolds. Mid-50s, bleach blonde, bob smile tight like she had to yank it into place. Barbara's eyes scanned Maya from head to toe like she was a mistake in the boarding manifest. "Ticket," she barked, despite Maya having scanned it moments before. "Yes, ma'am," Maya said, handing it over calmly. Barbara stared at it, flipped it over like it might be counterfeit. "This says first class." "It does." Maya's voice was polite but firm. "Seat 3A. Barbara's lips pinched. She returned the ticket with just two fingers, like it was something sticky. "Very well," she said without eye contact. Scene 2, racial microaggressions in plain sight. As other passengers trickled in, Maya watched Barbara move through the cabin. Her smile returned, but only for certain passengers. She bent low for a gray-haired couple, laughing, offering drinks before they even asked. She addressed them as Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, warmly complimenting the woman's scarf. The businessman next to Maya got a pre-departure bourbon and a casual, "Anything else for you, sweetheart?" Maya, not a word, no smile, no drink. She pressed the call button discreetly. Barbara arrived in less than 10 seconds. "Yes," she asked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'd like a cup of coffee before takeoff, please. Black, no sugar." Barbara's expression didn't shift. "We're closing cabin service." Maya tilted her head slightly toward another attendant, still handing out orange juice. Barbara hesitated, lips twitching, and then turned on her heel. Scene 3, the accident. When Barbara returned, the coffee was hot, too hot, and the cup had no saucer, no napkin. As Maya reached for it, Barbara's hand jerked, barely noticeable to anyone not watching closely. The liquid splashed forward in a steaming arc. Maya gasped sharply as scalding coffee soaked her lap and chest, searing through her shirt and into her skin. Her metals caught some of it, now streaked and darkened. "Oh," Barbara said, mock-shocked. "How clumsy of me." But then she leaned in close to Maya's ear and hissed, "Your kind belongs in coach." I see scene 4, the turning point. Maya didn't move, not at first. She was drenched, burning, humiliated, but still. The discipline drilled into her over 14 years of service locked her into place. Inside, though the war had already begun, she looked down at her ruined uniform, soaked and stained. Her notes for the White House speech destroyed. Her thighs ached beneath the wet fabric. And yet what crushed her most wasn't the pain, it was the message. This wasn't just about her. This was about what the uniform meant, what her presence meant, what every young black soldier watching would think if she let this slide. Her voice, when it came, was razor-sharp and calm. "Your employee ID and your full name. I'm filing a formal complaint." Barbara's smirk evaporated. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Carson Miller, the young white man in 3B, had already pulled out his phone. Scene 5, the crew circles the wagons. Barbara raised her voice theatrically. "This passenger is being aggressive. I've already apologized." Two other attendants appeared, flanking her. Kevin, the tall one, cut Maya off before she could speak. "Ma'am, if you have an issue, you can file it after the flight. We're closing boarding now." Maya sat back, blinking, slowly remembering every time she had been told to calm down, while others got away with less. Then came the final insult. The pilot, Captain Whitman, stepped out of the cockpit. "What's going on here?" Barbara put on a face full of tears. "She's accusing me of racism because I spilled coffee." Whitman's eyes landed on Maya. "I don't care if you're General Patton," he said. "Either accept the apology or I'll have you removed." Every passenger in first class was watching. Every eye, every phone, every judgment. Maya Johnson, decorated Army captain, was being told to shut up and sit down or be kicked off the plane. And so she nodded once. Understood, she said, not as surrender, but as a tactical withdrawal. Because she wasn't done. She was just getting started. Captain Maya Johnson sat motionless in her seat, her soaked uniform clinging to her skin, the faint sting of scalded flesh radiating from beneath the dark stain. Coffee still dripped from her medals. The entire first-class cabin had quieted into an awkward hush, a silence filled with sidelong glances and hushed speculation. But Maya's breathing was steady now, slow, controlled, honed through years of battlefield discipline. Barbara Reynolds, the flight attendant, had disappeared behind the curtain to the galley, leaving behind a trail of fake concern and deliberate cruelty. Her whispered words still rang in Maya's ears. Your kind belongs in coach. The venom behind it was unmistakable. Not an accident, not a misstep, a targeted assault. Maya's mind, trained to assess and respond, went into procedural mode. She quietly unbuckled her seatbelt and reached into the inner pocket of her ruined jacket, pulling out her small notebook, now damp and smeared, and a government-issued pen. On a fresh page, she began documenting the incident. Time, witnesses, exact words, temperature of coffee, reactions of staff, names if known. Across the aisle, she noticed Carson Miller, the young white man in a business-casual shirt, discreetly pointing his phone at her and then turning it off. His eyes met hers for a moment. He gave the barest nod. Respectful, quiet. It wasn't pity, it was solidarity. Maya nodded back. The boarding door had just closed, but the cabin crew moved as if everything were normal. Barbara had returned to her duties, entirely avoiding Maya's row. She didn't even glance her way. Another attendant, Tara, a younger woman with soft features and uncertain eyes, hesitated briefly nearby, clearly aware something had happened. She looked down at Maya's stained uniform, her brow furrowed with unspoken concern, but didn't speak. Maya didn't blame her, not yet. Across the cabin, murmurs floated that looked deliberate. She didn't even apologize properly. Did you hear what she said? But most passengers chose silence. Polite distance, the quiet permission that allows injustice to simmer undisturbed. Maya could feel it, all the weight of the moment, the familiar tug of war between speaking out and staying silent. She had been here before, many times, in officer quarters, in meetings, in military transport rooms, where her voice was doubted unless backed by overwhelming evidence. But this was different. She had the evidence, and now she had a decision to make. Her phone, still in airplane mode, sat quietly in her lap. She stared at it, fingers resting just above the screen. If she made a call now, she risked everything. Her removal from the plane, missing the presidential ceremony, the culmination of 14 years of service, all jeopardized by a moment of standing up for herself. But if she didn't act, she would become complicit in her own humiliation. Her mother's words echoed in her head like a prayer. Dignity is your birthright. A sudden movement pulled Maya back into the moment. Barbara had returned, her expression now shaped into a weaponized smile. All electronic devices need to be turned off now, she said sweetly but loud enough for others to hear, her voice laced with the false civility of someone performing for an audience. Of course, Maya replied. She powered down her phone, then slid her finger to a hidden screen and dialed. Not customer service, not the airline hotline, the Pentagon. A direct emergency line reserved for senior military personnel in active or critical scenarios. One that the average civilian wouldn't even know existed. The voice that answered was crisp and direct: U.S. Army operations. Caller ID confirmed. Captain Johnson, proceed. This is Captain Maya Johnson, ID 857294. Maya said, her voice low, professional. I am aboard Delta Flight 2437 en route from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. I am requesting immediate escalation to General Elijah Williams. There was a pause, a tone. Then connected. Stand by. The moment General Williams' voice came through the speaker, the hard edge of Maya's composure wavered just slightly. Captain Johnson, he said, surprised. Aren't you en route to the ceremony? Yes, sir. I am. But there's been an incident on board that threatens my ability to arrive in time, and more importantly, an incident of discrimination that may warrant immediate attention. Report. And she did. Calm, factual, precise. The flight attendant, Barbara Reynolds, deliberately spilled scalding coffee on my uniform and body. She whispered a racial remark afterward. Your kind belongs in coach. The pilot, Captain Richard Whitman, was informed and dismissed the situation. He threatened to have me removed from the aircraft if I insisted on filing a complaint before takeoff. There was silence. The kind of silence Maya knew meant a calculation was happening, one that moved faster than commercial traffic ever could. You're in full dress uniform. Yes, sir. Traveling per official military coordination for tomorrow's White House ceremony. Understood, Captain. Remain in position. We'll handle this from the top. The line cut. Maya exhaled. Not relief. Readiness. She slid her phone back into her lap as Barbara turned back to glare at her from the galley. The blonde woman's mouth twitched with confusion. Why wasn't the soldier fuming, crying, causing a scene? Instead, Maya sat still, hands folded, posture perfect. Because she had made the call. And the weight of that call was already in motion. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Passengers fidgeted. The pilot came on the intercom, voice slightly tense. Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently experiencing a minor delay due to air traffic congestion. We'll keep you updated. Maya leaned back into her seat, eyes closed. The burn on her thighs pulsed. Her soaked uniform clung cold to her skin now. But she didn't move, didn't complain, didn't blink. Because she had already called in the storm. And she knew something was coming. The cabin buzzed with tension. Captain Maya Johnson sat motionless in her seat, her stained uniform cold against her skin, the heat from the coffee replaced by a slow ache beneath her metals. Outside the aircraft, the airport tarmac shimmered in late afternoon light, but inside all warmth had been drained from the atmosphere. Everyone felt it. The pilot's announcement about air traffic delays hadn't fooled anyone. The plane hadn't moved in nearly 20 minutes. A subtle unease had crept into the faces of the crew. Passengers whispered with lowered voices. Some looked at their watches, others typed furiously into phones before the final call to switch off devices. Barbara Reynolds paced near the galley, now her movements more erratic than before. She peeked up the aisle. Her smile, once smug, was gone. In its place, a tight jaw, nervous eyes and fingers twitching at her sides. She knew something was off. Maya didn't move. She had made her call. She had done her part. Now came the part where systems either worked or failed. Captain Richard Whitman's voice cut through the overhead speakers again. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received notice from air traffic control. We are returning to the gate for a brief security inspection. This is simply a precautionary step. We appreciate your patience. A low murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers who had been annoyed were now confused. A man in row 2 stood slightly to check his overhead bin, but sat back down when a flight attendant raised her hand. The man next to Maya, the one who had scoffed earlier at her presence, turned around and sneered. Your complaint is delaying all of us. Before Maya could respond, Mr. Patterson, the older white gentleman seated across the aisle, spoke up firmly. Young man, your concern for time is selective. You had no issue holding us up for a second drink. There was a pause, then scattered chuckles. Even Maya allowed a small, controlled exhale. The tide was beginning to shift. As the aircraft rolled back to the terminal, heads began to turn. Something was happening. People felt it. The mood inside the cabin moved from irritation to curiosity, from casual to electric. Maya's hands remained steady on her lap, even as her heart picked up pace. A whisper from behind her seat, "Why are we really going back?" Then the thud of the jet bridge docking again. The door opened. But it wasn't the gate agents who entered. It was military. 3 figures stepped on board. The first 2 wore crisp, navy blue U.S. military police uniforms. Their boots echoed against the cabin's floor. The third man wore a dark suit, flashing a Department of Defense badge as he moved in behind them. The air was sucked out of the cabin. Passengers craned their necks. Phones reappeared in hands. Some began recording immediately. Barbara froze near the front galley, one hand still gripping the beverage cart handle. Her face drained of color. Captain Whitman stepped out of the cockpit, his expression shifting from irritation to disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. The lead officer, a staff sergeant named Rodriguez, didn't answer him. Instead, he walked straight down the aisle to Maya. Everyone watched. "Captain Johnson, ma'am," he said, stopping at her row and standing at attention. His voice was respectful, clear. "General Williams sends his regards. Are you injured?" Maya's voice remained calm. "Minor burns, Sergeant. Nothing that requires immediate evacuation." Rodriguez nodded, acknowledging the severity while maintaining protocol. The DOD agent stepped forward, a man in his late 40s with steel-gray eyes and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen much worse. "Captain," he said, "we'll need your statement later. But first we need to address the situation on board. Please remain seated." Maya nodded. Now it was Barbara's turn. Corporal Wilson, the 2nd MP, approached her with measured steps. "Ma'am," he began, his tone professional but unyielding. "We need to speak with you and the captain immediately. Please step into the jetway." Barbara's voice rose several decibels. "I demand to know why federal agents are boarding a private aircraft." Actually, the DOD agent cut in smoothly under Homeland Security coordination. And with military command involvement, we have full jurisdiction. Whitman's mouth opened to protest, but the words died on his lips. The Secretary of Defense is monitoring this situation personally, the agent added. A collective gasp spread across the first-class cabin. Barbara took a step back, shaking her head. This is insane, all over a coffee spill. Rodriguez turned toward her. Ma'am, this isn't about coffee, it's about conduct. And you're being removed pending investigation. Passengers began whispering louder now. Some clapped. Others held up their phones. One man leaned into the aisle to get a better angle. The flight attendants who had stood beside Barbara now shrank away, their gazes cast downward. Barbara was escorted off the plane. Captain Whitman followed moments later, red-faced and muttering to himself. Still, Maya didn't move. Not yet. She sat still, every inch of her wet uniform a symbol now. Her metals, darkened and crooked, caught the sunlight from the window. The pain in her legs throbbed, but the ache in her chest was sharper. Because this moment was never meant to happen. She had just wanted to fly. Quietly, proudly, to the White House. But here she was, grounding a plane with one phone call. Not out of pride, out of necessity. Rodriguez returned to her row. Ma'am, he said, lowering his voice, we've arranged a private transport to D.C. You won't miss the ceremony. There's also a military physician waiting to evaluate your injuries. Thank you, Sergeant, Maya said. He hesitated, then asked softly, would you like an escort to exit now, or would you prefer to wait until the cabin clears? Maya looked toward the front of the aircraft, where dozens of eyes watched her. Some with awe, others with regret, some with the realization that they had seen something wrong and said nothing. She stood slowly, her back straight. No escort, I'll walk out as I am. And then something extraordinary happened. It started with Mrs. Patterson, who began to clap. Her husband followed. Then Carson Miller. Then the entire first-class cabin. The applause swelled, not loud, not wild, but steady, respectful, a recognition of dignity reclaimed. Maya nodded once, and walked down the aisle, coffee stains and all. The lounge was quiet. Captain Maya Johnson stood alone before a floor-length mirror in the executive military terminal of Atlanta International Airport. Her uniform was still damp, still stained, but now had taken on a deeper symbolism, one she hadn't chosen, but one she would carry. Behind her, the door remained closed as Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Special Agent Taylor spoke in low voices with airport security. Somewhere down the hall, a medical team waited. So did a fresh military aircraft ready to fly her nonstop to Washington, D.C. Maya took a slow breath. This wasn't the plan. She was supposed to arrive clean and composed, deliver her speech, receive her medal, and quietly return to duty. No headlines, no hashtags, no firestorm. But that moment had passed the second scalding coffee hit her chest, and Barbara Reynolds whispered that poison into her ear. Now everything had changed. There was a knock. Captain Rodriguez stepped in, gentle but firm. They're ready when you are. Just a quick evaluation. She nodded. 2 minutes. As he left, Maya adjusted her posture. Despite the wrinkled fabric and the brown coffee stain streaked down her chest, she pulled back her shoulders and stood at full height. Because that uniform, though marred, still meant something. To her, to those watching, to every young black soldier who would board a plane tomorrow and wonder whether they belonged. She ran a finger over the edge of one medal, the first Purple Heart earned in Kandahar. She had taken shrapnel rescuing 2 wounded civilians during an ambush. No one questioned whether she belonged in uniform then. No one questioned it when she carried a fellow soldier on her back over a ridge under gunfire. And no one questioned it when she stood shoulder to shoulder with generals planning the final evac mission that saved 43 people. But here, 30,000 feet above civilian comfort zones, suddenly her seat was too good, her presence too much. Maya stepped into the hallway and was immediately met by the military physician. Captain Johnson, he said gently, may I take a look? She nodded and let him do his job. The burns, thankfully, were first degree, nothing permanent, but the redness across her thighs and abdomen spoke volumes. He applied ointment, dressed the worst areas, and stepped back. I'm recommending you rest before tomorrow's ceremony. That's not an option, Maya replied. Too many eyes are watching now. The physician gave her a quiet look of understanding. Outside, the hallway buzzed faintly. Maya could hear movement security coordinating personnel preparing. General Williams had told her to stand down, but she couldn't. Not anymore. Inside the lounge, her phone buzzed again. Text from Carson Miller. Your video just hit 3 million views. Then another. News is breaking. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox. And then they're showing the clip. The words, everything. Maya sat down slowly, trying to contain the rising swell of emotion. Not because of fame she didn't want it, but because finally, someone was listening. And then came a different buzz. "Private line," she answered without hesitation. "Captain Johnson," said the voice on the other end. "This is Major General Langston, White House Military Office. I'm calling on behalf of the President." Maya blinked. "Sir, we're aware of the situation. You will not miss tomorrow's ceremony. A private aircraft will transport you. And yes, the President has been briefed. He wishes to speak with you before the event." "Understood, sir." "One more thing, Captain." The General's voice softened. "You did the right thing. You stood up not just for yourself, but for a lot of people who have never had the chance to speak." After the call ended, Maya remained still for a long moment. And then the door opened again. Rodriguez returned, followed by Carson Miller. He looked slightly shell-shocked. "I was pulled out of my seat mid-flight," he said with a nervous laugh. "Never thought hitting record would make me national news." Maya gave a small smile. "Neither did I. I saw what she did. I couldn't ignore it." "You didn't," Maya replied. "You saw me, and that made the difference." Carson looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't do anything brave." "You did," she said quietly. "You stood up when others didn't. You hit record when others turned away. Sometimes that's enough to change everything." Minutes later, Maya stepped outside the terminal into a private loading zone. There waiting for her was a C-37A military transport jet, engines warm, flag insignia gleaming. An honor escort saluted her at the stairs. And for the first time that day, Maya let herself exhale fully. Because now it wasn't about her anymore. It was about what came next. As she settled into the secure cabin, her phone buzzed again. A message from her mother. Just 4 words. "I saw the video." Maya closed her eyes. Another message followed. "I'm proud of you." She didn't reply. She couldn't, not yet. But the tears that slipped down her cheeks, quiet, controlled, were more than words could express. The whir of the military jet's engines lulled Captain Maya Johnson into a state of half-focus. Not quite calm, not quite alert. The quiet tension of a soldier in transit. Across from her sat Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, scrolling silently through news updates on a secured tablet. Occasionally he looked up at her with an unreadable expression, equal parts admiration, concern, and readiness. They were 42 minutes into the flight to Washington, D.C., 42 minutes into a national reckoning. Her phone, now reconnected to secure signal, buzzed again. "General Williams." She answered instantly. "Captain status." "In the air, sir. Burns treated. En route to the White House ceremony. No further incident." "Good," he replied, then paused. "You've become a symbol, Maya. This is bigger than we expected. The Pentagon is coordinating with transportation. The Secretary of Defense has made this a case study for federal review." Maya stared out the oval window, watching clouds blur past. "I didn't intend to spark a movement, sir," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "But you did, and now we're making sure it leads somewhere." He didn't stay on long. There were calls to Congress, to the White House, to airline executives. But before he signed off, he said one more thing. "The President will meet you privately after the ceremony. He wants to thank you himself." Maya didn't respond. Not because she wasn't honored, but because she wasn't done processing the weight of it all. Meanwhile, the world outside spun faster than she could track. Carson Miller's video had now surpassed 5 million views. Media outlets replayed the moment of the spill, the phrase, "Your kind belongs in coach," and the applause as Maya exited the plane. Reporters camped out at both Atlanta and Washington airports. Hashtags like "Nulashard, respect the uniform and dignity is non-negotiable" trended globally. Veteran advocacy groups issued joint statements. Military leaders voiced support on truce. No's voiced support. Celebrities tweeted their outrage. But not everyone was on her side. Some headlines cast doubt. Was it really racism, Delta flight delay? Sparks, national overreaction? Comment sections flooded with accusations of pulling the race card and disrupting the flight for attention. Maya had known this would come. Standing up never came without backlash. The plane began its descent. Rodriguez reached into the overhead cabinet and handed her a sealed box. "From the Pentagon," he explained. "Fresh dress uniform, tailored to your record." Maya opened the box. Inside, a pristine replacement, same medals, same insignia, no stain, no sign of conflict. She held it in her hands and stared. It was perfect. But she didn't want it. "Not today." "I'm wearing the one I came in," she said. Rodriguez didn't argue. He simply nodded. Because he understood. That uniform, wrinkled, burnt, soaked, had become part of the story. Worn into battle. Worn into history. At the private terminal in Washington, dozens of security officers stood at attention. The moment Maya stepped out of the aircraft, the crowd parted. There was no applause here. No flashing lights. Just silence. The solemn kind. The kind reserved for generals returning from war zones. She stepped down the ramp, her gait steady, her chin high. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez walked at her side like a shadow. The media frenzy waited beyond the perimeter. But here in this moment, it was just her and the institution she served. A military transport van took her directly to the White House security gate. The ceremony was 14 hours away, but the president had called her early. Inside the White House, she waited in a small, ornate room lined with portraits of former commanders-in-chief. The door opened, and in walked President Adams, flanked by two aides and the Secretary of Defense. He extended a hand. "Captain Johnson." Maya stood and saluted. "At ease, soldier," he said. "You've earned that and more." He looked her over, eyes lingering on the coffee stain, the medals, the burns near her collar. "I've read the full incident report. I've seen the footage. I want you to know this administration stands with you. Thank you, Mr. President. What you endured, what you stood against, will not go unanswered." Then unexpectedly he stepped closer and said something no press camera would ever capture. "You reminded this country what integrity looks like, and we will do better because you held the line." Later in her hotel suite, Maya stared at the television. Every network replayed the moment the military police boarded the plane. Every clip paused on her soaked uniform, her unwavering stare. Some hosts called her a hero. Others questioned her motive. It didn't matter. She hadn't done it for them. She had done it for the girl in row 24B who saluted her during boarding. For her mother who taught in segregated schools. For every soldier who wore a uniform and still had to prove they belonged. A knock pulled her out of her thoughts. It was Rodriguez holding his phone. "You'll want to see this." It was an interview with Sandra Johnson, her mother, on CNN. Her gray hair pulled back, her voice calm but steely. "My daughter has worn that uniform in war zones, rescue missions, and now on a flight where she was humiliated because of the color of her skin. But she didn't retaliate. She reported. She didn't shout. She stood. That's leadership. That's service. And that's dignity." The interviewer asked, "Did you expect her to fight back?" Sandra's answer: "I expected her to do what she always does, stand tall when others would shrink. That's what I raised her to do." Maya's vision blurred. She wiped a tear away with her sleeve. Outside her window, the Capitol dome glowed in the evening light. Tomorrow she would walk into that ceremony, not just as a decorated soldier, but as a catalyst for national change. The legislation proposed in response to her incident was already circulating through Congress: new protocols for reporting discrimination in air travel, mandatory training for airline staff, and passenger rights reform. None of that had been planned. None of it expected. All of it necessary. And all because a woman who'd spent 14 years earning her place refused to be told she didn't belong. As she prepared for bed, Maya walked once more to the mirror. She didn't practice her speech. She didn't fix her hair. She just stared at the face of a woman who had been burned, dismissed, mocked, and who had refused to back down. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hands scarred, her dignity untouched. The White House lawn shimmered beneath the soft blush of early morning light. Military band members tuned their instruments. Honor guards stood motionless in their crisp dress blues. Rows of folding chairs lined the manicured grass, many already occupied by diplomats, military brass, and Gold Star families. But every head turned as the black SUV came to a stop at the south gate. From it stepped Captain Maya Johnson. And she didn't wear the new uniform that the Pentagon had delivered. She wore the coffee-stained one, the one that had become a national symbol, the one America already knew. Cameras clicked like static rain as she strode across the stone path. No one spoke, but everyone watched. Her ribbons, darkened by the previous day's assault, still gleamed in the sun. Her gait was steady, her expression unreadable. Reporters whispered. Civilians nudged one another. More than a few visitors rose instinctively to their feet, though no official anthem played. Maya walked past them all through the arched side entrance and into the secure corridor of the White House. Aides waited. They escorted her into the Blue Room where other honorees stood waiting, all in pristine condition. Maya's presence shifted the room's air immediately. Some turned and offered soft nods of support. Others looked away awkwardly, unsure of what to say. She didn't need words. The room already said enough. The ceremony began at 10:00 a.m. sharp. President Adams entered the East Room to applause. The national anthem played. The first half of the program moved in crisp, respectful rhythm, each service member honored with glowing citations, warm handshakes, and the glint of new medals. But the moment everyone waited for came near the end. And now we recognize U.S. Army Captain Maya Johnson for extraordinary heroism during the Zaran evacuation. Her courage under direct fire leadership under chaos and commitment to the lives of civilians represent the very best of our armed forces. Maya stepped forward. Silence fell across the room as the president extended his hand. And in full view of every camera in America, he grasped the coffee-stained fabric on her shoulder and said, "This uniform has already been decorated with more than medals. It carries the proof of a battle no soldier should ever have to fight. Yet you fought it with grace and valor." He leaned closer, microphone just out of range, and added quietly, "You changed something, and we're not going back." Later, in a private chamber off the main hall, Maya stood before the press corps. She hadn't wanted to speak, but now seeing the sea of cameras and eyes and questions, she knew she must. She took the podium, her voice clear. "My name is Captain Maya Johnson. I am an officer in the United States Army. I wear this uniform not just because I earned it, but because I believe in what it represents." She paused. 2 days ago, I boarded a commercial plane to fly to this very ceremony. I boarded in this uniform. I boarded with pride. And I was met with suspicion, disrespect, and ultimately assault. Not by a foreign enemy, but by an airline employee who believed my skin color made me unworthy of this seat, this rank, this dignity. Gas rippled across the crowd. I did not retaliate with anger. I made one phone call to my commanding officer, because in the military we are taught that disrespect to the uniform is disrespect to the nation. She let that settle. "I did not speak today to indict one person. I am here to indict the culture that allowed her behavior to go unchecked, that buried complaints, that taught her she could do what she did and never face consequences. This uniform is not just cloth. It is a contract, a promise, a stand." Maya stepped back. Silence hung for one heavy moment. Then the room erupted in applause. As the cameras cut away, her phone buzzed again. An alert from CNN. Barbara Reynolds had just released a public statement. It read, "I acknowledge that my actions and comments were inappropriate. I deeply regret what I did and the pain I caused Captain Johnson. I understand now how my biases influenced my behavior. I am seeking help to unlearn what I had never questioned before." Maya read it twice. She wasn't sure if it was sincere, but it didn't matter. That part of the battle wasn't hers. Later that evening, Maya met her mother in a quiet courtyard behind the Capitol. Sandra Johnson wore a deep blue blouse and held her daughter's hands like she had when Maya was 5 years old, scared after her first fight at school. "You didn't choose this baby," Sandra said softly, "but you didn't run from it either." "I just wanted to serve Mom," Maya said, "to be seen for what I do, not what I look like." "You were," her mother replied, "and now the world sees it too." Elsewhere in the country, change was already stirring. At Delta headquarters, the CEO had announced sweeping reforms, a full review of all past discrimination complaints, mandatory bias training for every employee, an independent board to handle passenger grievances, public transparency reports every quarter. Other airlines followed suit within days. Congress began drafting legislation to make such reforms mandatory. The Department of Defense created a new role, military-civilian rights liaison officer, offered directly to Maya. She hadn't answered yet, but she did open one letter that night. It was handwritten, from a 9-year-old girl named Amina in Ohio. "I saw what happened to you. I never knew soldiers looked like me. I want to wear the uniform too someday. Thank you for being brave." Tears finally broke through the shield Maya had held up for days. Because this was why it all mattered. Not the ceremony, not the cameras, the little girls watching, the learning, believing. As the city lights sparkled across the Washington skyline, Maya stood once again at her hotel window, still in the same uniform. The stain had dried, but its message never would. The next morning, Maya Johnson awoke to an inbox filled with over 5,000 messages. Not from government officials, not from journalists, but from strangers. Men, women, veterans, children, teachers, students. People who saw in her something they hadn't seen in themselves for a long time. Hope. One message read, "Captain Johnson, I served in '89. I was spit on in uniform. I thought nothing had changed. But you made me believe again." Another, "My son said he wants to be like you. Before last week, he only wanted to disappear. And then, I was in row 26C. I saw everything. I didn't speak up then. I should have. But I'm speaking now. I'm sorry and thank you." Maya scrolled through them in silence, the weight of each message pressing gently on her chest. Then came the knock on her hotel door. It wasn't room service. It was the Secretary of Defense. Captain Johnson, he said, his tone low, but sincere. We've been reviewing proposals. The president would like to offer you a new commission. Maya blinked. I'm already commissioned, sir. He nodded. This would be different. You'd head a national initiative liaising between the Department of Defense and the Department of Transportation. You'd oversee training programs for airlines, veteran advocacy integration, civil rights oversight. A pause. You'd still wear the uniform, but you'd also help redefine what it means for civilians to respect it. Maya didn't answer right away. She sat back, letting the offer settle in her bones. It wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about policy, about permanence, about making sure that what happened to her never happened again. Across the country, the reverberations of her story reached unexpected corners. In Baltimore, a fourth-grade teacher held a class-wide discussion using a still image of Maya stepping off the plane. In Houston, a police department began retraining officers on civilian-military interactions. In San Francisco, the city council announced a Respect and Service initiative honoring veterans across all public spaces. But not everyone was ready for change. On a late-night talk show, a host joked, "Guess coffee is more dangerous than combat now, huh?" The audience chuckled. Maya didn't. Because while laughter echoed in some rooms, silence screamed in others. In Atlanta, Barbara Reynolds was spotted leaving a counseling center with her lawyer. Reporters hounded her. "Barbara, do you have anything to say to Captain Johnson?" She paused at the car door and whispered almost inaudibly, "I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what she'd done. I didn't see her." And that perhaps was the truth. Not malicious intent, but dangerous invisibility. Back in D.C., Maya sat alone on a park bench near the reflecting pool. The Lincoln Memorial loomed in the distance. She hadn't slept much. The adrenaline had faded. The interviews were over. But her mind raced. She thought about her squad in Iran, the little girl she carried through a burning village, the helicopter pilot who stayed in the air 15 minutes too long just to get them out, the medic who lost a leg to an IED, the interpreter who never made it home. They had all worn the same uniform. Why did hers get questioned? As she sat, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, are you Captain Johnson?" She looked up. It was a teenager, maybe 16, wearing a junior ROTC shirt, his eyes wide with awe. "I just wanted to say thank you for showing me what strength really looks like." She smiled softly. "Strength is standing up even when you're scared," she said, "even when you don't want to be noticed." He nodded. "Then you're the strongest person I've ever seen." Later that night, Maya returned to her base for the first time since the incident. The barracks were quiet, but the mess hall had been turned into a surprise gathering space. Dozens of soldiers stood waiting. As she walked in, the entire room stood and saluted. Rodriguez stepped forward. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." She nodded. "You were disrespected by one person, but honored by a nation." Applause erupted. Then someone brought forward a plaque. At the top it read, "Dignity is non-negotiable, Captain Maya Johnson." Beneath it, a quote from Maya's White House speech had been engraved in brass. "This uniform is not just cloth. It is a contract, a promise, a stand." That night, she placed the plaque beside her medals. And for the first time since that coffee cup struck her chest, she breathed without the weight. Not because the story was over, but because the next chapter was hers to write. 2 months had passed. The world had moved on, but Maya Johnson had not. She still wore the uniform every morning, still tied her boots with deliberate tension, still glanced in the mirror, reminding herself that the face staring back belonged to someone who had made history without asking for it. And yet, something had changed. The world had moved. It moved in letters written by school children now framed in the Pentagon's West Wing. It moved in policy as 2 major airlines rolled out their Veteran Respect Training Initiative. It moved in whispers at airports where gate agents now hesitated before raising their voices, aware that one act of disrespect could ripple into national reckoning. And it moved in Maya, too. Subtly but surely, she had declined the television interviews, the book deals, the speaking tour, not because she was afraid of the spotlight, but because she respected it. "If I'm going to speak," she told her commander, "it's going to mean something." That something came on Veterans Day. She was asked to deliver the keynote address at Arlington National Cemetery. Standing at the base of the tomb of the unknown soldier, surrounded by wreaths and memories, Maya felt the eyes of the past on her. Thousands had gathered, not just for her, but because of her. Her voice echoed through the chill autumn air. "When I was pushed on that plane, it was not just my body that was shoved. It was the story of every soldier who has ever been overlooked. It was every battle fought beyond the battlefield. Every scar that didn't come from enemy fire, but from friendly ignorance. I did not retaliate. I did not fight back with fists. I picked up the phone, I stood in silence, and the silence was heard across the world. That's what the uniform means. It means dignity even when others try to strip it. It means courage even when you're scared. It means standing even when you've been knocked down. I didn't want to be a symbol, but maybe the world needed one. As her voice faded into the wind, the crowd rose. Even the veterans in wheelchairs. Even the old generals. Even a woman in a Delta Airlines blazer, tears quietly streaming down her face. That night, Maya stood alone at her father's grave. Private First Class Robert Johnson, Vietnam, never returned. He never got to wear the uniform long enough to see it respected. But now his daughter had made sure the world did. She knelt by the headstone and whispered, "Daddy, they saw me. They saw us. We're not invisible anymore." She stayed there for an hour. Not moving, not needing to. Elsewhere on that same night, millions tuned into a new PSA on national television. Black screen. One voice. Maya's. The uniform doesn't care what color your skin is. Neither should you. Then in bold white letters, Shuranawish, stand for those who serve. The campaign went viral within hours. In schools, kids debated Maya Johnson alongside Rosa Parks. In households, dinner conversations turned to respect, equity, and courage. In the military, recruitment among young black women spiked for the first time in over a decade. And on a plane from Seattle to Miami, a 6-year-old girl in pigtails told the flight attendant, "My mommy's a soldier like Captain Johnson. Don't push her." At the next base ceremony, Maya didn't receive another medal. Instead, she was presented with something different. A pair of folded gloves. Not hers, her father's. Recovered after decades buried in a warehouse. Somehow someone had made a connection matching DNA records, a dog tag. They had been shipped to her with a note. "For the soldier who taught the world what dignity looks like," Maya cried. Not just for the gloves, but for everything they represented. Weeks later, Maya finally boarded another commercial flight. Uniform, full gear, no escort. The gate agent smiled nervously. "Captain Johnson, it's an honor to have you with us." She nodded. No need to say more. As she stepped down the aisle, passengers turned to look. No hostility, no silence. Just quiet respect. An older woman in 12A stood. "You want my seat?" Maya smiled. "No thank you, ma'am. I've earned my own." And she sat in 12B, spine straight, head high. As the engines roared and the plane ascended, Maya closed her eyes. Not to sleep, but to hold on to the feeling that in a world still learning to see, she had finally been seen.